r/AskReddit. People who have legally injured killed someone in self-defense. What is your story? My great uncle lived in a trailer in a rural area of Florida. A kid, 17, broke in one night and held him at knife point. He had no money and told the kid that. He also told the kid to leave or he will grab the shotgun next to him. Kid charged and slashed him. Then he shot him dead. They ended up charging his friend, driving getaway car, with the murder. Turns out they robbed several trailers that night. Chose the wrong one. Not me but my aunt. About 2 years into her first marriage, her husband beat her black and blue one night. She didn't call the cops, didn't seek treatment, just went to bed and told him the next time he laid a hand on her she would kill him. About 6 months later, he did. So she did. He took a swing, broke 2 of her ribs. She grabbed a kitchen knife and shoved it into his eye. She called a friend who was a local sheriff's deputy, who told her to call 911 and then immediately call a lawyer. No charges. The broken ribs helped prove self-defense. Here we are 20 years later and that sheriff's deputy is now my Uncle Gary. We go hunting together every couple years when we can find time. My parents' story. During their wedding reception, 2 men with masks entered and announced they'd be robbing them. Everyone thought it was a prank, laughed it off, and went on with the party. They pulled out guns and said it was no joke. Everyone was on the ground on all fours, and they went around collecting wallets and jewelry from the guests. They came up to my grandpa, I've never met him, and saw what looked like a wallet in his breast pocket. It was a date book, and asked him to hand over his wallet. He said he didn't have one, cause he didn't, and was punched in the stomach. My uncle looked up at the guy and had a gun put to his forehead and was told, I'm going to blow your ducking brains out. My uncle grabbed the gun and turned around, hurling the guy's face into his shoulder. My grandpa and others tackled him down and held him down. The second guy went running off, and my dad ran track on college, chased after him and tackles him. Him and others pin him down. Police come and everyone is excited that the ordeal is over. The cops say something like, this is going to take a bit longer though. There was a death. Freaking out, my family asks who and find out the first guy was suffocated from being held down. Later it was confirmed he was on cocaine and died from something related to his heart. Edit. At first said ceremony meant reception. My mother had a friend who had an abusive husband. One day she showed up at our home, disheveled, distressed, red marks on her face and arms, crying about her husband going crazy. My mom of course is sympathetic, but 1, it's the middle of the day, and 2, she's alone with me and my younger brother and she doesn't want the drama. She tells her friend she'll call the police and asks over and over again, is he going to come here? Because I can't have that. My dad, who would have sent that a-hole to the moon, bang, zoom, at a moment's notice, was at work. Mom's friend assured her that he isn't because he doesn't know where she is and says not to call police because, as it went still goes, that will make it worse. Sure as shit not 10 minutes later there is an insane pounding on the front door and yelling, hubby's come to collect the missus and he doesn't care that he's making a scene. Mom tells me to take my brother and lock ourselves in her bedroom, but the bedroom is right by the front door and there is a window so I can hear everything and I get full view of what happens next. After more screaming between hubby and wife, and my mom, he throws his shoulder into the door. My mom has decided she's had it. Right before he goes to shoulder the door again, it flies open and out comes my mother, swinging a baseball bat as hard as she can. She got few hits to the a-hole's arms and 1 to his back, which sent him tumbling off the porch and into the grass. All the while she's cursing and threatening him, swinging the bat in the air like a lunatic. Think Shelley Duvall in The Shining, but with 1000% more profanity and a more controlled aim. My mother is 4 feet 10. If she weighed 100 pounds at the time, she weighed a lot. I doubt she did any real damage, but the shock of it made him scramble to his feet and haul ass down the block. He did not come back thankfully, but of course, as things went, and as they still go, Mom's friend went back to the a-hole after a short cooling off period. Thankfully she was able to finally get away, and the a-hole is rarely mentioned now, but the story does come up occasionally when my mom and her friends serve too many Bloody Marys over brunch. It seriously is one of my mom's proudest moments. Haha. Obligatory not me, but my grandpa. But here goes. Grandpa was something else. Arrested several times during Prohibition for running stills in the hills of Appalachia and other colorful sorts of stuff. Anyway, many years after that, he was in a bar somewhere in town. Some young a-hole got in his face, as young a-holes do. Words were exchanged. The young guy pulled out a gun, and he stuck it in my grandpa's face. Grandpa didn't have time to determine the extent of the young man's commitment to his actions, so he decided to pull out his gun and kill him right there. Cops were called, witnesses were interviewed, and Grandpa was free to go. I was working as a bouncer at a gay bar downtown. Had this drunk skip out on his tab at another bar and they called our bar to warn us. Sure enough, he was sitting in one of our booths just kind of existing. Manager that night tells me to haul his ass out because he is not welcome. So I do. He then stands outside the door I'm working just non-stop yelling next to me, constantly poking at me and insulting me and kicking my ankles. Dumb childish shit. At one point he grabbed a cord for my earpiece by my collar and snapped it. So he got a solid boot to the balls and dropped to his knee for a minute or two. Then went back to being a complete and utter dildo like he had been. I am very patient. He was annoying, but I have a little brother and lots of younger cousins, so he was no worse than what I had growing up. This lasted a good half hour or so before out of nowhere while I'm checking IDs I feel hands around my throat and they start to squeeze. Didn't even think. Just spun around. Swung a face height, popping him solidly in the mouth and grabbed him by the hair and bounced his face off the brick wall next to me. 4 or 5 guys who were watching the whole thing grabbed him and he's just standing there stood throwing insults at all of us in a complete drunken state. Blood running from his face. And like a gift from above, a police cruiser does a roll by and I flagged him down real fast. Cop gets out, asks what's going on. I give him a quick rundown. He asks what happened to the guy's face. I told him I punched him and bounced him off the wall after he grabbed my throat. Cop cuffs and stuffs him and I never saw him darkening our doorway again. I'd like to think he sobered up in the drunk tank and reassessed his life. But he probably just went to be obnoxious at a bar without a doorman. Not me, but my dad had to knock someone out with a pipe wrench. My dad was in his mid-20s and had just started up his HVAC company. It was late at night. One of his customers called about his tenants complaining the air was out. At 3 AM, my dad, as a recent business startup all on his own, got dressed and went out on the call. He got there and fixed the AC, and when he was leaving, it was a bit of a rundown, poverty-stricken area. A man who was clearly drunk thought he was with his girlfriend who was living in the house my dad just worked on. My dad, obviously, was like, no, I'm the HVAC repair guy. Dude pulls out a knife and charges my dad, and my dad simply swings at him with what was in his hand, which was a wrench. Knocked the guy in the temple and he was out cold. Dad kinda panicked and jumped into his van and sped off. Nothing ever came of it, so I assumed the guy was okay, aside from a massive headache. Probably woke up thinking he had a killer hangover. I'm a medic and firefighter. We got called to a rollover accident New Year's morning. Obviously a drunk driver. It was 3 AM. We were first on scene. Walked up to the car and found a gun pointed at my face. I grabbed his arm, smashed it into the A-post repeatedly. My partner didn't even know what was going on. The guy dropped the gun. I told me partner to get it, and I ripped the guy from the car. He's screaming I broke his arm. The police get there. I tell them he had a gun and pulled it on me. They grab him and throw him in their car. He was arrested, taken to the hospital so his arm could be splintered, was charged with driving impaired and assault, pleads guilty and went to jail for a couple of years. Not me, but my grandpa. When he lived in Mexico, he owned this one ranch where during the day he had workers to maintain it because it was really big space and there was lots of cattle, horses, etc. Anyway, one night he decided to stay and sleep at the main house in the ranch. He has his main house an hour away closer to the city and has his sister maintain the ranch house. Right before he went to bed, someone snuck onto the property before he decided to get alarms and other security systems. And a man tried to steal some of the money in the main house that he knew was there because he was friends with one of the workers and was working with him to try and keep the money. He sneaks on and my grandpa was still awake about to go to bed, and he sees him from the second story window creeping up to the house and sees an object in his hands. My grandpa goes and grabs his shotgun and goes to the front porch and yells at him, and he just charged. My grandpa aimed the gun and shot him in the chest. He also ended up firing the worker he found out was working with him. Granddad was in the Navy stationed in Panama after World War II. One day, he and one of his shipmates were out patrolling or on guard duty or some such when a local kid runs up and says there's an American in a bar nearby and he's about to get killed. So my granddad and his comrade follow the kid to the bar and walk in to see an American sailor all cut up, backed into a corner holding a chair over his head, surrounded by a couple of locals with knives. Granddad scans the room and sees a pair of Panamanian cops in uniform sitting at a nearby table just watching and laughing. He tells the guys with the knives to back off and one of them turns and lunges at him. So he shoots him in the belly. Immediately, the cops jump up reaching for their sidearms. But Granddad's buddy shoots them both right around the same time Granddad shoots the second knife-wielding attacker. So maybe 30 seconds after they walked into the bar, 4 guys are dead. They got court-martialed but somehow came out without so much as a discharge. Not sure how or why. I need to get around to seeing if I can find any records on it. Also, my granddad never met a story he couldn't embellish. But I have a feeling this one is true. He'd talk about horrific violence he experienced at Iwo Jima till the cows came home. But he did not want to talk about Panama. I've posted this as a comment on another AskReddit before, so copy paste. My 18-year brother and his, then, 18-year wife lived next door to a family with a teenage son. She started an affair with that 17-year son. One day, the son barged into my brother's place and started attacking him. My brother was packing and moving BC. He was leaving for the army. He had pulled down a metal pole in a closet to make room for boxes. My brother grabbed that pole and used it to fight off the teen. The kid ran out bleeding. My brother called my dad. We lived a few blocks down the street, and my dad jumped into action. He grabbed one of his hunting shotguns and some bird ammo. He ran out the door to the car screaming for us to call 911. My mom and I ran after him. BC, we were clueless and wanted to see where he was headed. My mom was on the phone with the cop and they were dispatching the one cop that we had in our town. We start running down the road to my brother's place. BC, we saw dad pull in. As we get near, we hear a gunshot and see my dad and brother taking cover behind the car doors they'd opened to climb in and leave. Another shot goes off and we can see it isn't my dad firing. The teen had run home next door and was bleeding and told his dad my brother was trying to kill him. His dad grabbed his handgun and saw my dad and brother leaving and started shooting. That's the gunfire mom and I heard. Dumbass kept running towards my dad's car. I saw my dad position his shotgun in the car window and fire one round. Then, he and my brother climbed in the car and started driving back at us home. We all finally get together and dad says he shot the man in the stomach. Chaos breaks out on our street. Ambulance, cops, and people. They take the other dad away to the hospital and my dad into custody. Within hours, we find out that the man has died. The bird shot hit his liver and he bled out. My dad was charged with murder and we started receiving death threats. In the cover of night, we are moved. We hid for days until my dad was bonded out. Ended up moving far away. Grand jury was convened and I had to testify to what I saw. After all the evidence and testimony were presented, my father wasn't charged. BC, the grand jury decided it was self-defense. I now have contact with some friends from that town. BC, of social media. We never talk about what happened or anything. Things carry on as normal. That day is forever burned into my memory. Not me, but my father. Back in the 60s, he was at a small town bar with a friend. The friend was playing pool and won a bunch of money off some guy he'd just met. So the guy goes out to the car, gets a gun and kills my dad's friend. Everyone in the bar kind of jumped on the gunman, and my dad stomped his head with his steel-toed work boots. The guy died in the hospital, but my dad was never arrested or charged with anything. He doesn't talk about it much. The only reason he told me was because I made a stupid joke about shooting someone and he wanted to teach me why it wasn't funny. Yes and no. Had a drunk guy chase me to my car and punch me in the mouth so hard my teeth punctured my cheek. I ended up breaking the guy's jaw, so I was the one charged because I didn't have any actual damage and he had a broken bone. I was charged with aggravated assault and ended up taking something like a plea bargain to avoid both going to trial and having a violent crime on my record. If there had been a camera in the parking lot it would have been obviously a case of self-defense. But it was my word against his and he had hospital bills to prove it. I had to pull a gun on 4 men who ambushed me while I was delivering pizzas. I was on the phone with 911. They came close, it was pitch black outside. I let my gun shine in the light of my car, yelled at them to leave. When they saw the gun, they all stopped, backed up and got in the car, then sped off. Then I stopped delivering pizzas. I was living in Queens while attending FordMU in the Bronx. Came off the train one night. There was a young busker at the end of the platform rapping about how if everyone just gave a little money God would give a little back. I looked straight ahead, ignored him, tried to power walk past him. I'm a small female. He was a much bigger man. He grabbed me by the arm and started trying to charm me for money. I was pulling away, trying to make him let go. He wouldn't. I started screaming and then I just started stabbing him with my keys. I always carried my keys with the tips stuck out between my fingers because it was a not so nice neighborhood and I always got home late. It didn't kill him but it hurt enough that he let me go. This little immigrant woman had been coming up the platform and heard me screaming, so she came running and started hitting him with umbrella. So now he's on the ground bleeding and being sacked about his personage by a 75-year-old Ukrainian woman who introduced herself to me as Olga. Police came, arrested him, gave me and my new friend a pat on the back and a ride home. Fortunately it was the only time I was ever assaulted when I lived in Queens. When I lived near campus in the Bronx it was a lot worse. My roommate was insane. I dated the wrong girl years ago in high school. After we broke up she said I hit her. Just so we are clear, I didn't. A couple of guys, including her new BF, came up to me and sucker punched me as I walked by. At the time I was figuring competitively in Thai boxing but not talking about it much. I cracked 6 of one of the guy's ribs. It was all on camera and I promised to not press charges if they didn't. My punishment as it happened on school property was that I had to go say sorry to him at the hospital. My smug ass words exactly were, "I'm sorry I cracked your ribs after you and your friend punched me." My grandpa was a cop very briefly in his 20s. He quit after an incident, either a group prison break or a group escaping a police van. Something to that degree, involving a massive shootout. He killed a couple men, while basically half the small town police force was wiped out. It traumatized him to the degree that he won't talk about the incident or acknowledge his old co-workers. And while she didn't get away with it, I still think her story is a good, interesting one. A female family member of mine tortured and killed a sex offender. She was molested as a child, and the cycle continued when her husband molested their children. After the divorce, she gave custody to her grandma for seemingly no reason, then went on to break into a man's house and mutilate him, before ultimately shooting him. I'm not sure how long she's going to be in prison, but she was arrested when I was a little kid. Bro, you made it to the end? You're a ducking beast. I'll cut you a deal. Smash like and subscribe for more curated content. It's free and that's a great price.